I have the pleasure, the supreme pleasure, of introducing Abbot Joseph Boyle to you. Abbot Joseph grew up in New York, great place to grow up. He graduated from Regis High School and 2 weeks later went to join the monastery at St. Benedict's Monastery out in Snowmass, Colorado. And he's been there ever since. He was elected abbot in 1985, and he still remains the abbot. And it's no wonder, because he is, for me, and I'm sure for many, many people here, the epitome of what hospitality is. It's on his very being. You always feel welcome. You always feel included. And the most remarkable thing is Abbot Joseph never forgets your name. It's just astounding. And I'm certain that there's many people that visit that monastery. And it's confusing sometimes, recognizing one person and another, particularly if you've only ever seen them once. But he truly welcomes the guests at St. Benedict's as Christ, which comes right out of the rule of St. Benedict. So he embodies monastic teaching and hospitality to the T. He's all-embracing. And the whole monastery is like that. It's kind of like a family. When the mom and the dad are all embracing and welcoming, the kids are too. So when you go to the monastery, and Abbot Joseph, as mom and dad and leader, is welcoming, all of the monks are welcoming. So he's a great mentor and a great wonder. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Abbot Joseph Boyle.
Well, with my ego running after Gail's very gracious, wonderful introduction, stretching truth there, I want to take a minute and add another qualification I have to the list she gave there, just so that you know my connection to centering prayer and its general material. Gail had the fact right. 2 weeks after graduating from high school, I flew out to Snowmass, Colorado, and joined the monastery. That was 47 years ago. And one of the reasons that I chose St. Benedict's 2,000 miles from home was because Father Thomas was the abbot there then. And I had heard he would be a good spiritual teacher. And he certainly has been for all these years. Now, as a novice, you don't get to work with the abbot all that much. You have a novice master who you see every week, and that kind of works out your stuff. However, once a month, you got to talk to the abbot. And these talks with the abbot, as with the novice master for that matter, were not a sit down and chat. In those days, you knelt on the tile floor and you spoke to this person who represented Christ. And the rule of St. Benedict in the degrees of humility says in the 5th degree, the monk opens up his heart to the spiritual father and speaks of all the thoughts in the mind and the heart, puts it all out there. And so that's what I would do with Thomas. Now, Thomas sat, as people know him, a very clear desk, nothing on it except a little notebook. And as I was speaking, once in a while, he'd open that notebook and write something down. Now, those of you that know Thomas know he writes very small letters, very tiny, so I couldn't read it upside down from where I was, But then, after I was a novice for 2 years and came to the completion of that and made my simple vows, That very day, we got a phone call from Spencer, Massachusetts, that the abbot of Spencer, Dom Edmund, had resigned, and that there would be an election in about 3 or 4 weeks. And Thomas was elected then and became the abbot of Spencer. So he picked up his belongings, all 3 of them, and took them off to Spencer. And I would get to see him only once a year or so when he'd come and visit. And so pretty much that's how things went. And then 20 years after elected abbot of Spencer, Thomas resigned and came back to Snowmass, to our deep joy. And right away he got into this thinking about centering prayer. This extent of it was beyond his imagination, but how to communicate it and how to get it out there was the issue from early on there. And one time, as Thomas was working over his material, he gave us a talk. And the subject of the talk was the false self system and false happiness programs. And when I heard that, I said, oh, those notes on his desk. I found I had been Thomas's model for the false self. And he himself was way too innocent to understand a false self. But I had provided all that material to him. So that's my qualification for speaking here today. So when Thomas and Gail asked me to do this, realizing it was way outside my comfort range to talk like this, but knowing that I love Thomas and I love Gail and I love the centering prayer movement, I said yes to it, and the title was Listening. And at first I thought, well, that's interesting. They must be picking different acts of the human and working down them one at a time or something of that sort. But as I got to thinking about it, I realized listening penetrates everything in our life. Listening's at the core of how we live, and especially how we live spiritual life. So I began to get more and more a sense of just how important this topic is that we're talking about. And what I'd like to do this morning, I got in here early enough yesterday to hear a talk or two, and I realized that those that have been at the conference have covered this ground intensely and with very good information and wisdom. So it's not like I think I'm going to add anything to your knowledge or say anything you haven't heard before. What I'd like to do is be able to say something that lets you reflect on it, take it inside, and integrate it and come out with it in your own form. So what I've chosen to do is to make this presentation a series of images and stories. So it's not going to be a lecture, just images and stories. Take them, work with them, do whatever you want with it, but let the Holy Spirit deepen that energy within you. So, to get into the business, the first story, first condition, the first dimension of listening I want to cover will have the title of The Restaurant. Now, just imagine all of us gathered here. Friends are meeting that have met each other, like from the monastery, meet friends from different parts of the country, all gathered. And at lunchtime, apart from our box lunch there, we decided to go to a restaurant. And maybe 8 or 10 of us are going to sit together. And we go in, and the maitre d' is able to get us one big table, a round table, and there are 10 of us at this table. It's going to be wonderful to hear what's been going on with each other's lives. And at this point, as we sit down, a problem starts. The person speaking is at the far end of the table, and the person is speaking with a soft voice. So this is a little challenging, especially if we're a little hearing challenged with aging anyhow, to hear the person over there. Now, second thing is, that's not the only sound in the room. There's all sorts of other sound. People are shuffling their chairs, people are walking by, The person next to me is swishing her martini and the ice is hitting the glass. You know, all this sound is in there. So it's making it triply difficult to hear what this person is saying. Okay, now, kind of confessions of an extrovert. There's another distraction. The person at the table behind me is actually quite a bit closer to me than the person across in my own table. And this person is speaking louder. And this person is saying something quite interesting. They're giving a critique on the morning's conference. So half of the attention is going off over here to this other conversation. And if you're really an extrovert, perhaps a couple other conversations. So being able to hear what's being said is really hard. In fact, and I'm getting quite a bit older, and my hearing is going down. So I wonder, maybe I need a hearing aid. And so the last time I was at the doctor, the audiologist, and he tested me and said, yes, my hearing has gone down. And I said, well, perhaps, is this the time when people ask for a hearing aid? And he said, well, no, not really, not yet. Unless it happens to be a fellow who's sitting here and his wife is standing right over him saying, he gets a hearing aid. So I said, well, I don't have a wife yet, so I'll go without it. But I was still curious because there's still a problem. So I began asking people with hearing aids, would that help, you think? And generally they say no, because the hearing aid just amplifies all the sound and doesn't really focus on what you need to hear over here. And focusing is exactly what needs to happen. So now, the point of this image for me is, I wonder to what extent is this an image of my life? You know, God speaking in a soft voice, and meanwhile there's all this other sound, all these other conversations I'm plugged into. Is this what I look like from outside? And especially, is this what my prayer life looks like when I settle down to the quiet prayer and all the other sounds, conversations, and whatnot? And so I use this as an image for myself to think what I need to be doing is focusing, not amplifying the sound, but focusing the attention and consciously dissociating from these other conversations, letting them go. Quiet, trying to filter out these other sounds at the table and just get my mind to pick up the sound of that voice that's speaking. It's the attention we need to pay if we're going to listen. So to me, this is the first dimension, or you might say, the first condition for being able to listen. It's the willingness and effort to focus all the attention, the consciousness, on that soft voice of God. Now, for the second dimension, I have a story to tell, a little long, but it means a world to me, and I'll share it and see if it carries the meaning for you. True story, all the stories I'll speak are true stories, happened about 25 years ago, so before I was abbot. I was the cellarer in charge of work, and actually I happened to be in charge of our main business, which was producing eggs and selling them at the local market to restaurants and to supermarkets. We had 10,000 chickens. That sounds like a big number. In the egg business, that's not a big number, but for us it was a big number. Now, we would process these eggs. You get about 8,000 or 9,000 eggs a day coming from this, and we would process them on 2 days, Monday and Thursday, and then take the eggs to the supermarkets and restaurants. We had working for us at that time one neat fellow, Tom Rupert, a hired hand, just a gem of a person. And on this particular day, he brought his young son, Josh, to work with him. I guess he was babysitting Josh, in essence. And Josh is about 4 or maybe 5. And so I get the processing started. We roll out these wagons. Each wagon has about 4,000, 5,000 eggs on it. And they start loading them onto the washing machine. They get candled and sized and packed and ready to go. So once things were rolling, I then went out to check on the chickens and see how they were doing for the day. So it took me about a half hour. And when I came back and opened the door into the processing house, I was greeted by a horrendous sight. The whole empty part of the processing house where we washed the eggs was not empty. There was a stack of egg flats on the floor that spread out like a small mountain. Now, an egg flat, to explain this, you buy your eggs in dozens, but restaurants buy them in 2.5 dozen, 30 eggs, and it's a flat of cardboard. And you alternate them this way, so that the eggs don't get the weight. These cardboards carry all the weight. But when you're not using them that way, you get them all alternated the same way, get them all facing the same way, and they nest together. So that about 100 flats might take up a stack like this. And when the person is washing the eggs, he's stacking them off to the side. So he has several big stacks of them. Well, it turns out that Joshua had decided to go to these stacks and is just pitching them into the center of the floor. So this whole floor area is covered with this mountain of egg flats. So I walk in, I'm about to roll out more wagons of eggs so we could keep going, and I see this. So I come over to Joshua and say, Joshua, I need to roll out more eggs. So would you please stack these egg flats the way you found them so I can get the eggs out? And he says, no. Now, this is a little shocking for me, okay? Because as abbot in the monastery, sometimes I ask a monk to do something and he's not going to do it, but he'll say, yeah, I'll try and get to it. And you know, well, that means he's not going to do it. I better find somebody else. But just to have somebody say no, it's right there. So then I said, oh, I better let him know I mean business. Joshua, this is very serious. I really need to have this floor space cleared up. So would you please stack these the way you found them? No. So I'd run out of authority at that point. And I thought, well, maybe I'll try self-interest. I said, Josh, you know that you and your dad are going to go and deliver eggs into Aspen when we get finished here. Now, you're going to be really late if we don't get them processed here. So would you please just begin stacking these? No. So I was at my wit's end. So I went around to where his dad, Tom, was putting, with a vacuum lift, putting eggs into cartons for the store. I said, Tom, I'm having just a little difficulty with Joshua here. He's got the whole floor covered with egg flats, and he won't pack them back up again. So Tom looks around the machine and says, yeah, that's the case. He says, Joe, when Joshua says no like that, what he means is he doesn't know how to do it. But he's too proud to tell you that. So he says no. I said, oh, wow. So I went back and knelt down by these egg flats and began stacking them. And then in no time at all, Josh is kneeling next to me, stacking them. And pretty soon we get enough stacked that we've cleared off an area. And I said, Josh, can you continue stacking these while I roll out another wagon of eggs? He said, well, sure. And we went on, okay? But we didn't go on before I had gotten a tremendous lesson. I was listening with my head, okay? I know the meaning of no. I'm unwilling to do it. No, there we are. His father was listening with his heart and his head and his intuition and all those depths of being. So the heart could read what Josh really meant. I think it's incredible that we listen with our whole being. So that's point number 2. That when we listen, we're listening not just with our heads. Obviously, we have to use our heads. But we're listening with the whole of our being, with the heart, with the emotions, with the intuition, with all we are in our depths. So that's what we're talking about in listening. We're talking about focusing on the soft voice and listening with the whole of our being. Okay? Now, for the third condition, the story I'd like to take is from the Bible, 1 Samuel. And Samuel is this young child, very special child, special in how he was born late in life to Anna. And so at a young age, he's given back to God. He's dedicated at the temple there. And he's more or less an apprentice for the old prophet Eli. And so as he's lying down one evening, he hears his name, Samuel, Samuel. So he gets up and runs over to Eli and says, "Here I am, Master." And Eli says, "Well, I didn't call you. Go back to bed." So Samuel goes back, and after a bit, he hears it again. "Samuel, Samuel." And he runs again off to Eli. And Eli says, "No, I'm not calling you. Go back to bed." So poor Samuel, he goes back and hears it a third time. "Samuel, Samuel." And he goes running to Eli. Now Eli is a prophet, so finally he gets it. Okay? 3 times he gets it. He says, okay now. Next time you hear this Samuel, Samuel, say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." Okay? Now, when Samuel says that, he is saying, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening, and my answer is yes." He's speaking with the yes already formed within him. He's not speaking in a non-committal way, like, "Speak, Lord, I'm kind of curious about what you might say. You know, I'll take it into consideration. If it suits me, I might even do something of that sort." It's, "Speak and I will do it. Let me know." And this really, so many characters in the scriptures are exactly this. Think of Mary, Jesus' mother. To me, her glory is she's the woman who always said yes to God. That's who she was. Her life was a yes to God. I heard recently that there is even a chapel in France, Notre Dame de Oui, Our Lady of the Yes. That's who she was in her core. And if the church fathers don't mind me offering a little correction or suggestion, including our own church father, Bernard of Clairvaux, sometimes in their sermons in Advent, they would be building up the drama of the scene of the Annunciation with the angel Gabriel talking to Mary, and they would have the whole of the heavenly court looking on in suspense. What is she going to say? You know, is the incarnation going to happen? Is salvation history going to get rolling here? There was no suspense. Her life was yes. God knew her answer was yes. In fact, God didn't even ask the question. Gabriel didn't come and say, "I have a proposal for you. We want to know, would you be willing to be the mother of God?" Huh? It's the power of the Most High will overshadow you, and you will conceive a son and call him Jesus. God knew her answer was yes. I mean, this is such a critical point. I'm going to spend more time on it. That if we want to listen, we have to be in that space of a commitment to yes. If we say that for Mary, all the more so for Jesus. Jesus, the person who always said yes to God. One of my memories from theology course was a saying from Yves Congar, a Dominican from France in the Paris Priory. And in one of his books, he described Jesus as saying, "Finally, in Jesus, there was a heart on this planet that beat in total harmony with God's heart." Think of that. That's who Jesus was, a heart that beat in total harmony with God's heart. His yes to God. So, what is the opposite of having a yes to God formed, committed to as we listen? Is it having a no to God ready in us? No. I mean, logically, that's the logical opposite. but that doesn't happen in our lives. I don't think that we often think of ourselves as saying no to God. I think what happens is we don't hear clearly. We begin to make the thing a little fuzzy and vague and ambiguous. Or we take it out of a time context where the time is now and we move it to some vague point in the future. Like Augustine before his real conversion when he said, "Lord, grant me chastity, but not yet." You know, it's that kind of a listening that we don't really hear what God's saying because we don't want to hear. We don't want what He's going to say. When I studied theology, which is about 45 years ago, so ancient, and we studied Thomas Aquinas, he had something to say which I hope I'm remembering more or less correctly. I didn't go back and check. And he talks at this one point about how the intellect and the will interact. And of course, the first level of interaction is that the intellect is looking out over reality. It is seeing what is true. It presents the truth to the will. The will sees it as good and goes after it. That's the pattern. But he says there is also a flow back the other way. The will is watching the intellect while it's working, encouraging it or whatever. And if the will sees that where the intellect is going, it doesn't want to go, it sends a signal up to the intellect. Cloud over these issues. Change that syllogism. Make the thing ambiguous. Like I say, shift the time frame on it. The will is doing a non-listening. It's getting in the way of the intellect presenting its conclusion and has it just float out there. And the thing about that is, if that's where we are, we don't hear. If we want to hear, we have to be committed to the yes, or else our system is going to get in the way of the word coming through to us. I think this point is so strong that I would like to take one more example of it, and this from a somewhat secular source. The person is Dag Hammarskjöld, who, as some of you will remember, was the Secretary General of the United Nations from 1953 to 61. 61, he died in a plane crash in Africa on a peace mission. He was a Swedish diplomat, and no one who knew him guessed that he was a religious man. He kept that totally private. It wasn't until he died and people saw his diary that they realized not only is he a spiritual man, he's probably a mystic, this wonderful fellow dedicated to peace. And they published his diary under the title Markings 2 years after his death. And in that book, Markings, at first it's pretty heavy-duty stuff. I mean, the world was in the Cold War. Things are not looking so good right there. And the weight of it is there, weighing down the mood of the book. But someplace towards the middle, he has a spiritual breakthrough. And he is able to come out with this prayer that I think is a gem. For all that has been, thanks. To all that will be, yes. Think of that. For all that has been, thanks. To all that will be, yes. Now, I love that saying, and a cousin of mine, knowing that, did a needlepoint, and I have it hanging over my desk. I think it gets to the heart of things. For all that has been, thanks is probably the welcoming prayer, our ability to accept all that God's done in our life and in doing. But then the statement, to all that will be, yes. That openness, that commitment to yes.